Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 229, Lysis 215a to c. Socrates has just introduced a new verb for loving, agapao, instead of the verb he's been using, phileo. Agapao gradually replaced phileo in most senses, so that in modern Greek, agapao is the verb for loving, while phileo is reserved for kissing. But the element phil in compound words still means fond of or loving. In the transitional period, in early Christianity, agape is already a dominant factor and means already a strong love. But back in the classical period, which is where our dialogue takes place, agape is still a weaker sort of affection, a fondness, and the verb is to be fond of, to be affectionate. What is interesting is that the person who is fond of someone else, or is the person someone else is fond of, is still the philos. Why Socrates has substituted one verb for the other is still unclear, but it was worth making the point. Lysis has just agreed that if two people are the same, then there is no point being affectionate about the other. Hode me agapoto pos philon, udamos. What is not affectioned, in what way is it philon? In no way. We need the passive of the verb to be affectionate, and there isn't a passive. The idea is that if there is something which someone is not fond of, how is that thing philon? We have already discussed the adjective philos, phile, philon, which means dear, something loved, and as an adjective it does not mean a friend. By straight logic, if someone is not fond of something or is not affectionate toward something, that thing is not loved by that person. The problem is that in this argument, philon is ambiguous and may be understood as a friend. And this is what might cause some confusion to Lysis, and probably is what Socrates is hoping for. Alade homen homoios to homoio ou philos, hode agathos to agatho kathoson agathos, ou kathoson homoios, philos an eie, istos. But the similar person to the similar person is not philos, meaning either a friend or someone loved. But the good person to the good person, inasmuch as he is good and not as much as he is similar, would be a friend. Perhaps. Socrates here is simply contrasting two previous conclusions, which Lysis himself should have done had he been thinking dialectically. The similar has been found to be useless for the similar, but the good was found to be good for the good, and only the good people could be friends. This was an arbitrary conclusion made by Socrates himself, but Lysis should have remembered it. If it is now found that the similar isn't a friend to the similar, then the good is not a friend to the good, because the good is similar to the good. Lysis doesn't understand what's going on. Socrates spoon-feeds him the contradiction, and still Lysis doesn't see it. Socrates says the good to the good inasmuch as he is good, but not inasmuch as he is similar. This doesn't make sense. The good is similar to the good. When Lysis says perhaps, it doesn't mean that he's found the contradiction, it just means he doesn't really understand what Socrates is saying. If he had understood the contradiction, he would have said, this is absurd. This at least is what some people say in other dialogues when they actually understand a contradiction. Tide, ucho agathos, kathos and agathos, katatosuton hikanosan e hauto, nai. What then? Wouldn't the good person, inasmuch as he is good, be sufficient to himself, by and large? Yes. The notion that the good man is self-sufficient harks back to the idea that the person who is a master of all technai wouldn't need anybody else, but everybody else would be dependent on him. Lysis seems to have a problem with understanding how power works. Hodege hikanos udenos de omenos kataten hikanoteta. Posgar u. The sufficient being someone lacking nothing according to sufficiency? How not? Socrates is saying here that according to sufficiency, the whole point of sufficiency is that someone who is sufficient lacks nothing. The problem here is that the word sufficient, hikanos, doesn't only mean sufficient. The hikanos is also the proficient, the person who is good at technai. And the person who is good at technai lacks nothing according to proficiency. Socrates is once again playing with words and manipulating Lysis. Hode me tu de omenos udet agapoean ugar un. But the one lacking nothing would be affectionate for nothing. No, he wouldn't. Hode me agapoe udan philoi, udeta. But the one who wouldn't be affectionate wouldn't love. Not at all. Hode me philonge u philos, u phainetai. But the one not loving isn't a philos. It doesn't appear. Lysis is finally beginning to see a problem with his earlier support for being totally independent and master of all technai. Once he is in that state, he wouldn't have any friends. Or rather, he himself wouldn't have the need for anyone else. He wouldn't be a friend to them. Pos un hoi agathoitois agathois hi min philoi esson taiten archen, hoi mete apontes pothenoi aleilois. Hikanoigar he autois kai horizontes. Mete parontes chrean hauton echusin. Tuste toiutus tisme chene peripolu poiestai aleilus. Utamia, efe. So how will our good people be friends to the good in the first place if even when they are absent they don't pine for each other? For they are self-sufficient even on their own, and even when present they have no need of them. By what stretch of the imagination would they care for each other? They wouldn't, he said. Lysis is still answering as if friends really are there just for use. He accepts that good people are self-sufficient. He accepts that friends are only there to be used. Therefore, the good have no need of friends. We are beginning to see an inner tension in Lysis between his ambition to be the best at every techne, and on the other hand, his desire to remain friends with Menexenus, at least Menexenus. Philoidege ukan eien me peripolu poiumenoi he autus, alethe. And they wouldn't be friends if they didn't care about each other. True. Lysis clearly isn't thinking dialectically, and Socrates has to make his own conclusions. That is, he makes conclusions for Lysis. Athre deo Lysi me paracruometha ara ge holotini exapatometha. Postefe. Observe, Lysis, where we are being misled, or are we being entirely deceived? How so, he said. This isn't the first time Socrates has had to question the argument himself. The last time he did this, Lysis entered the conversation and Menexenus dropped out. Doing the actual objecting doesn't seem to be something either Menexenus or Lysis likes to do. Ede potetu ecus allegontos kai arti anamimnesco mai. I heard someone once saying, and I am just now recalling, Oti tomen homoion to homoio kai hoi agathois polemiotatoi eien, that the similar thing to the similar thing and the good people to the good people are very hostile. The Greek predicate doesn't receive a definite article, so we may interpret polemiotatoi as the most hostile and not simply very hostile. Who would be this person Socrates has heard saying such a thing, that the good are the most hostile to the good? Kaide kaiton Hesiodon epegeto martura. He even used to adduce as a witness Hesiod. Socrates is therefore claiming that he has only now remembered that there was a person who was in the habit of saying that the good were most hostile to the good, and he used to adduce Hesiod. We should note that Socrates says he recalls or recollects the words of a famous person, or rather here he recalls someone who himself adduces a famous person, Hesiod.